One of the many jobs that I have had in my life was driving tow truck, which is not typically thought of as female tow truck drivers, but there's a few of us that have done it and are doing it. It was a very interesting job. I had been fired from my previous job through no fault of my own, and I had some time off, and I ended up getting a job as a bank courier, which was not very fun. Had to do a lot of driving, and I really didn't understand what I was doing. But a couple days into it, I got a phone call. My dad worked as a janitor for a tow company, and he was like, "Hey, they're hiring for this. You should apply." So I applied, and I got a phone call from one of the managers, because there was the company that I worked for, Speeds Towing, was very large, and they had multiple divisions, and they still do. So one of the managers called me and said, "Hey, I'd love to interview you." So I went in and talked to him, and he actually knew my dad and was really cool with my dad and wanted me to work for him. And because he was into diversity and, felt that I could do the job, and I felt that I could do the job. The only thing was I had to talk to the HR manager, who wanted to make sure that physically I could do the job, which is understandable because it is a very physical job. So I made an appointment with him to go and talk to him, do whatever he needed me to do. I go down to the main office, and I, go to his office, and he's in a meeting. So I'm waiting outside, and once his meeting ends, out he comes, but he comes with the owner of the company, who happens to be somebody that I'd known since I was like 3. He was a friend of my dad's. They'd met through their love of old cars. So he saw me, he's like, "Grasshopper," because that was my nickname back then, was Grasshopper. And he gave me a hug, and he's like, "What are you doing here?" And I said, "I have a meeting with the HR manager about a job." He kind of turned around and looked at the HR manager and said, "You are going to hire her, right?" And it was kind of like, you don't really have a choice, but Mike was the HR manager's name. He was like, "She's applying to be a driver, so I just want to make sure that she can physically do the job." Like, okay. So I ended up talking with Mike, and he was like, this is the deal, is like, some of these things weigh about 75 pounds. I want to make sure that you can pick it up and, safely put it on the ground, pick it back up, put it on the truck, and that kind of stuff. So we went downstairs to one of the trucks, and there's this dolly system, which is basically 2 wheels that's on a metal frame that is attached by 2 long bars to another set of wheels on a frame on the other side of the vehicle. And the wheel sections are the heavy parts. So he takes it off, puts it on the ground, puts it back out, and goes. And I said, "Can I modify that?" He goes, "Whatever, you can do whatever, as long as it's, it seems safe." So I grabbed the handle, and I put my hand underneath the other side, and I picked it up, and I put it on the ground, let go of it, picked it back up, put it on the truck, and I stepped back, and he goes, "Can you start tomorrow?" And so I said yes. So I immediately quit the job that I was doing, and I think they knew it wasn't a good fit anyway. And I started training as a tow truck driver the next day. And I ended up working with them for about 1.5 years. It was a great job, and I loved it, but it was also a very physical job and very long hours. I would go to work at 7 in the morning, and you'd get off at 5, but some of us would be on call. So you might continue to be working until, the calls died down, and you could go home and get some sleep. And depending on if you were first out, meaning that you were the main person they called if something came up. There was a first out, second out, and a third out just in case. And I would run first or second out, and sometimes you'd get called in the middle of the night to have to go out and tow somebody's car. There had been an accident, or they ran out of gas, or whatever. Police calls, PPIs, which is personal property impounds, where we would have a contract with different apartment complexes, and if people parked in other people's spaces or they were parked in the fire lane, the manager of the complex would call us and say, hey, I need this car towed, and we'd go out there and pick it up. Similar to, but not exactly the same as repo drivers, and not as dangerous as being a repo driver. But that being said, I did have one time when somebody came out with a gun. So what happened was I got a call in the middle of the night about a car parked in the fire lane. Gave me the description of the car, license plate, and all that kind of stuff. So I go up there and I start hooking it up. This car had a sensor that alerted the owner, hey, somebody's messing with your car. I got it lifted. Front end's up in the air, and I'm starting to chain it up. And this guy comes out and he's got a gun in his hand. He had it down by his side. He wasn't like pointing it at me or anything like that. But he had a gun. And first of all, he was pretty riled up, of course. Somebody's taking my car. But when he saw it was a female, he kind of like decompressed a little bit. Okay, woman, it's a tow truck driver. What's happening here? So we started talking, and I told him, hey, you're parked in the fire lane. You can't be parked here. He said, I haven't gotten it chained up. I don't have any problem putting it back down. You just got to go find a spot to park it. He's like, okay. So I put it down, unhooked it, let him drive off. And then I popped back into my rig and got on the radio and was like, hey, the owner came out and I released the vehicle to him. And by the way, he was carrying a gun. He didn't point it at me, but he did have a weapon, and I'm okay. My dispatcher, of course, you can't come out having guns or pointing guns at people. So they called 911, and within 2 or 3 minutes, there was about 20 cops there. There was a sheriff's office just down the street, and the state police were also just down the street, and they all responded. Turns out that this guy had just gotten out of federal prison, and he then found himself on his way back because felon in possession. And I ended up towing his car as an impound for the police department instead of private property impound. That was pretty interesting. Had another incident that ended up having a long-term impact, which was interesting. I was not on, it was my day off, so I wasn't even on call, but I got a call or a page from, we carried pagers back then, a page from dispatch, and I called them, and they were like, hey, it was late, like it was 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning, and they're like, hey, we have a special request from the sheriff's office. They want you to go down to this location. You need to pick up the flatbed. They're going to have some tarps that you need to tarp the vehicle. I'm like, okay, this is weird. So I get dressed and drive down to the office, and the guy who's on call, of course, is very upset. He's like, I don't understand why I can't do this. And I'm like, listen, I don't know. The sheriff's office requested me specifically, so I'm going to do it. So I took the keys from him, took the truck, grabbed a couple tarps and some rope and stuff, and drove over to the location. Well, it turned out that this vehicle had been the driver, the owner of the vehicle, had driven across a 2-lane highway and ran over this couple walking down the street, and deliberately. And it was his ex-wife and her new husband. And he killed them. So the sheriff's deputies, I worked with all of them in the area, and they knew that I had worked at a different sheriff's office, and knew how to preserve evidence. And that's basically what I was doing. I wrapped up the front of the car and also put the second tarp on the back of the truck, rolled the car up onto the flatbed, and then hauled it off to the state forensics unit and dropped it off there. And that was something for me that I was like, okay, this is pretty major. And so that was like in 95 or 96. Several years later, 2004, 2005, I'm living in New Jersey, and we're watching the national news, and this news story comes up that the case had finally gone to trial, and they had physical evidence that had been found on this car, and they showed the car, and I'm like, oh my God, I'm the one who towed that car. And they had the physical evidence, and this guy had had a diary where he had been basically stalking his ex-wife, and he knew that she and her new husband would be they walked the same route every night, and so he basically was stalking them until the night that he killed them. And he said it was an accident, but obviously it was premeditated, and he ended up being found guilty and I don't know how long he was sent, probably for life, to federal prison for a double homicide. Not even vehicular homicide, but regular homicide, which has a higher jail time. So that was interesting. That was one that I was like, holy smokes, I was the one who wrapped that car up and hopefully preserved that physical evidence that helped to convict this man. But a lot of times the experiences were really good, really funny. Had one time where I got called out to change a tire at Gold's Gym. I'm thinking, okay, maybe they don't have a star wrench or whatever, and they can't, change the tire themselves. I get out there, and it's this big, muscular guy, and some of his friends, and I pop out of the truck, and they start laughing. The guy who owns the truck was not laughing. The other guys were laughing. Apparently he had a star wrench. He couldn't get the lug bolts loosened. And they were laughing. They're like, oh, this girl's gonna, change your tire for you because you're not strong enough, giving him a hard time. So I get my lug wrench, and I have a cheater bar that's 3 feet long. You can't see that, 3 feet long. And it's pretty thick, but it's hollow. So stick that on the star wrench, and I just all of them, and loosened up all the lug nuts, and then pick the truck up. It was one of those with big tires and raised up in the air, and so a regular jack wouldn't work. So used the stinger part on my truck and lifted that truck up. He and I pulled the tire off, put the new one on, and then he tightened things up. But it was a pretty funny experience to have to go to the gym and loosen stuff up for the guy with the big muscles. But if you don't have the right tools, it doesn't matter how many muscles you got, right? And if you have the right tools, you don't need a lot of muscles. It was always a great experience, though, to go and have especially the little old ladies who would see me and be like, oh my God, you can't tow my car. Like, ma'am, I can tow your car. Don't worry. I'm not physically doing it myself. My truck's going to do it. But it was awesome to be able to help people, and I have so many stories that I could share, but we'll save those for another time.